Hey guys. So for anybody who wasn't able to join us this morning, there were some students who got the link and joined me at 10 o'clock this morning, and we went through the first part of The Great Gatsby. We actually went through the first chapter, which is very, very important. As you can imagine, anything, the first chapter, the first part of anything is a big deal because you get your setting, you get your characters, you get everything kind of really like going. And that certainly is the case with this. So I meant to record it and then to put it on there for you all, but I forgot. I've never done it before. It was my first time. I'm going to try tomorrow. For anybody who can't join us, I'm going to try to record it, try to remember to, so that I can post it and those people who weren't there can at least hear what I have to say, because I'm pretty sure this morning's talk is going to be better than this evening's. I know there's going to be stuff I'm going to leave out. So anyway, I do want to go ahead and tell you that on your Google Classroom, I have given you the PDF form of this book, the whole book. It's all there online. I don't like it as much as the book, obviously. If we were in class, you'd have one like this, okay? But it's better than nothing, and I do want you to have it for anybody who's interested in reading it kind of word for word. That's cool. I think that'd be great. I am going to tell you, though, right up front, it's very hard. It's very difficult. Fitzgerald, as we learned a couple of weeks ago, he didn't write very many things. He was not a prolific writer. He doesn't have a large volume of work, but this is his masterpiece. This is like perfection. It's honestly like a work of art. The diction, the sentence structure, it's perfection, but it's difficult. It's hard to read. So it took me a while, and the more I read it, the more I appreciate it, and the more I absolutely love it. And this time last year, I was really quite obsessed with it. And by the time we were done, I had found another book, which is a book of analysis over this book, and I read that, which is really not my thing, but I do love it. It's really great. So anyway, I also gave you a character sheet, and I put some things already on there for you. I told you all the characters that you would need to know, but I also put some stuff about the setting. And, this book was not Fitzgerald's masterpiece in his day. It was not until after his death that everybody kind of looked and said, hey, really, that's like a perfect example, the perfect epitome of the Roaring Twenties. But when this book came out, it was during the Depression. And of course, the Depression was so hard. As we know today, we're in a somewhat of a depression right now. And back then it was even harder, as we learned back when we read Of Mice and Men and studied it. People didn't have money for a book, and people didn't want to read about all the fun of the Roaring Twenties because the Roaring Twenties was over. And so this book, it took a while. But once it did get appreciated for what it is, which is literally a book about the Roaring Twenties, the perfect snapshot of it, then it really took off. Another interesting thing I'll point out is that in the book that I read about this book, it pointed out that it's really not a book for young people. It's really not a teenager book. And I thought that was funny because it is the quintessential teenager book. It's taught in junior and senior classes throughout our entire country. So it's definitely a teen book, whether or not it is meant to be. But I can say this, it does require, for you to really get into it, the depth, I think, that it's meant to be, it requires maturity. It requires something that only age and experience can give you. So I do believe that if you read it now, and then if you read it again some years down the road, like what I did, it has a whole different meaning when you get older and you've gone through some things and your life experience has kind of kicked in. But anyway, I gave you a character sheet with the setting, and I also gave you a little map of East and West Egg, and you'll know a little bit more about what that means here shortly. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and jump into the first chapter. There are only 9 chapters in the book, okay? And the book is narrated by a fellow named Nick Carraway. And Nick is not really the main character. He is the narrator, but he's not really the main character. We don't really learn a whole lot about Nick. He tells the story. It's all from his point of view, from his perspective, first person point of view. But we don't know. I mean, Nick's not really who the story's about by any means. It's just his eyes who's seeing the story. But we learned some things about Nick, obviously, here in these opening pages of the book. We learned that he comes from a prominent, well-to-do family in the Middle West of the United States. So we live in the Midwest, right here in Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois. That is the Midwest. And so he came, in the book, he came from a prominent, well-to-do family in the Middle West. He went to college at a school called New Haven, which was a prep school for fancy people. And after that, after he graduated from college, he actually went off and fought in World War I. They just call it the Great War in here because we haven't had World War II. So it's really basically the main war, World War I. And when he came back from World War I, he went back home. And when he went back home, it was really boring. It was really dull. He'd been through a lot and he'd seen a lot, and there was nothing to see where he came from. So it said here that everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. And so Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 2022. So he comes out to sell bonds, and bonds are stocks and bonds, okay? So he gets into the stock market, basically, which is what everybody was doing in the Roaring 20s, and this was 22. So it's just at the beginning of the 20s when things are really starting to happen, and his dad had enough money that he paid for his whole first year, and he says that he thought he was going out there permanently in 1922, okay? So he goes out and he rents a little bitty place. He calls it, let me see. He calls it a bungalow. And a bungalow is usually like a 2-bedroom, small house. And he doesn't even buy it. He rents it. And he does this on what this little peninsula called West Egg. And on the map, whenever you look at that, you'll see what that is. West Egg is for what they call new money. New money would be people who have just made their fortunes, people who are newfangled millionaires, perhaps. Now, he doesn't live in a big fancy house on West Egg, but he lives next to a certain guy named Gatsby, who's considered new money, okay? Now, where you have a West Egg, you also have an East Egg. And East Egg is just across the bay, the Sound, as you call it, and it is where the old money comes from. And the old money would be the people who have, for generations, had lots of money in their family, and they're born with, say, a silver spoon in their mouth, definitely. So he lives in West Egg, tiny little bungalow next to a big, huge, sprawling monstrosity, which is lived in by Gatsby, okay? Now, we get into a couple of main characters, really, I'd say almost the main characters of the book, the Buchanans. We have Tom and Daisy. Now, I can say right up front that really very few people in this book are worth getting to know. You won't like them. I specifically do not like the Buchanans.